Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay, let's dive into the Middlekauff mailbag. Very, very easy to get involved. At John Middlekauff is the Instagram. Fire in those DMs. It seems the 49ers this year are not going to have an elite defense. Probably not top 10, but certainly not in the top 3 or 5. In my opinion, this means they need to have a more complementary football team this year and lean into what they do best. Run the ball. If I were Lynch, I would be focusing the draft on beefing up the offensive line. And at minimum, trading up to get a plug-and-play lineman. And if I were Shanahan, I would lean into the running back by committee this year versus driving CMC into the ground and probably getting him hurt. I feel like this could allow him to do more on offense, like leveraging the big man Jordan Mason on the short yardage, A-gap runs, and potentially even flexing out CMC some more as a wide receiver. Not to mention Elijah is a really solid back. He's hurt a lot. I know the Niners had a great rushing season this year, but teams substantially slowed it down in the playoffs, and it was a miracle they got to the Super Bowl leaning on a struggling Purdy and shady defense. Kyle has a talented running back room, but doesn't use it to his advantage. Do you agree? Kyle Shanahan treats Christian McCaffrey like the Lakers or Warriors will treat LeBron and Steph in these play-in games. He rides him like he's the best player in the league. And you could argue there are a lot of games where he is. I do think, given his history being injured, to sustain his greatness, because he is a great player. I mean, he is easily one non-quarterback, one of the best players in the league. It is hard, the amount that is on his shoulders. It really is. And there were so many times last year, either they'd have the lead or late in games, it was unnecessary for him to keep running him up the middle, and he did. So, yeah, I don't agree with it. I didn't agree with it last year, and I'm not going to agree with it this year, but I don't think he changes. I think he goes, we get this guy in the prime of his career. He's under contract for the next couple of years. We're going to fucking ride him. I'll never forget Pat Hill when it was clear early on Ryan Matthews' junior season. Like, this kid is gone. He's going to the draft. Hand him the rock. And I think you treat Christian McCaffrey, like, I understand his mindset of, like, this is the best player. He gives me the best chance to win. And there's not a 5-year career guaranteed. So we might as well take advantage of it while we have him. I wouldn't do it if I could do it. No, I'm not claiming I know more about or better at football than Kyle Shanahan. But I do think that he overuses them for sure, especially in unnecessary spots. But I'm also realistic. I've watched Kyle Shanahan. Every snap he's ever coached. I do not expect him to change at all. So, yeah, in a perfect world, they should. Do I expect them to do it? No. I have a question regarding scouts and bias. When scouting a college player, how much does the setting, opposition, star players on their own team, skill, level of opposition, big game versus homecoming, etc., play into the decision as opposed to pure technique and skill exhibited? As an example, potential third-round pick, Spencer Rattler, throws a 10-yard out to a number 3 wide receiver against LSU. Makes the play. Next week, he throws the same route versus Division II Hawaii State. Made that up. I was like, Hawaii State? Never heard of that school. And it falls incomplete. Does the scout get wowed, biased by the competition against the better opposition, or do they look at holistically like he only completes 50% of his throws? How do scouts and the GMs avoid falling into the biases? I think anytime you're scouting a player, right, let's use Spencer Rattler, for example, you would watch him against the best teams he plays. So off the top of my head, I don't have South Carolina's schedule. They play Georgia every year. You would throw on that game. They play Clemson every year. You would throw on that game. They play Tennessee. You would throw on that game. if I was a GM or a scouting director, I probably wouldn't even watch Hawaii State. That game doesn't matter. It's very, very easy with the top programs, Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Oregon, Bama, whatever, because they're always going to be playing 3 or 4 really, really good teams. Now, you have to do more extensive research than just what you would watch other games in the conference, but you don't need to watch them against Hawaii State. Where I think it gets more difficult is when there is a top prospect at Fresno State or Boise State or these programs that don't play a lot of good competition. It's harder to judge it then. I remember Giants fans will remember this name, Ramses Barden, big wide receiver, shattered Jerry Rice's records in D1 AA. He was at Cal Poly when I was at Cal Poly. He ended up going in the 3rd round to the Giants. But who the hell was he playing? And he wasn't any good in the NFL. And he played in a triple option. That's a tough evaluation. Evaluating a guy at South Carolina is not that hard. Because I have a ton of other teams with NFL players I can watch him against. So I think it's simply, you just watch him against top competition. Right? It's really easy to evaluate Michael Penix and Rome Odunze. You throw in the Oregon games, you throw in the Michigan game, you throw in the Texas game, like you just watch them against the best teams. Throw in the Utah game. It's much harder to evaluate good players at lower schools, non-Power 5 schools. Because, like, how many NFL guys are they going up against? So that question, good question. I would say relatively easy. Got a question for the mailbag. This may seem insignificant, but doesn't it tremendously help the Rams with Jimmy G signing? Think about it. Who knows the Niners and Shanahan game plans for the Rams better than him? Wondering if the unique insight that Jimmy would have could give the Rams the icing on the cake to overcome their regular season woes against the 49ers. I think the Rams could make it to the Super Bowl this year. It's a good question. It doesn't hurt. I mean, I would say it doesn't hurt at all. I think we overvalue that sometimes. You know, coaches historically have been asked this question when a guy they've had for a while or even during training camp signs with the team they're playing week 1. You can only do so much. Now, there are specific things that Kyle clearly does against the Rams that gives them a lot of trouble. That has been very, very difficult for them to just neutralize. It's like whether the Niners have been as good as them or not, or better, they've just dominated them consistently. Cannot hurt. He is suspended early. So I guess it would depend when the games get scheduled because he won't be there early. But good question. Can't hurt. Can't hurt. I don't know if it's the equivalent of like knowing their plays that are coming, but it should benefit them for sure. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I think star tight ends are proving to be a more valuable commodity amongst contending teams than star wide receivers. I think since Bill got his hands on Gronk and Hernandez, personnel folks started to realize that the added utility of having what is basically an extra offensive lineman, that the defense has to also game plan for a weapon that can create huge personal mismatches that your offense is able to take advantage of. Gronk is an extra offensive lineman. Hernandez was a slot receiver, but I hear what you're saying. In some of these, Brock Bowers is not a blocking tight end. I was listening to the Athletic podcast. They do a good job on just breaking down draft guys. And there was, I think, Brock Bowers on the line of scrimmage to the rest of the tight ends in the country was near the bottom. I mean, he's essentially a slot wide receiver. So the mismatches, there are only so many guys that are good players that are good blockers. Like, is Laporta a big-time blocker? Like Kittle, the Gronks, like they're pretty rare. Kelsey doesn't really block. Mark Andrews is a big blocker. Goddard gives effort. Despite this, we still see high-end wide receivers making nearly double what tight ends. Well, it's a huge market inefficiency. If you get a star tight end, he is dramatically cheaper. Kittle, Andrews, I'm probably blanking right now because out of the loop a little bit in terms of just games going on all the time. But Kittle, I mean, these guys make so much less than star wide receivers. So there is no disputing financially. If you get Sam Laporta and he becomes a star, he's one of the best values in the league. Star tight ends and linebackers. If you hit on a star linebacker, you don't have to pay him what a defensive end makes. Yet he covers the tight ends and makes 15 tackles a game. Like Roquan Smith and Fred Warner get screwed because of their position. But from a team standpoint, it's an incredible value. So, yeah, I mean, do you see teams putting more of a premium on acquiring playing tight? I think everyone wants a really good tight end. I think they can be more difficult to evaluate. And from what I've heard from my scouting buddies, this isn't a very good tight end draft. Last year's was. Remember, a bunch of tight ends went in the top like three rounds. I'm trying to think. Kincaid, obviously Laporta. I'm definitely missing one guy that went high as well. I mean, I think there were like 6 or 7 tight ends that went in the top 100 picks. Don't quote me on that, but definitely was a lot. Hey, John, I've been listening to your podcast for a couple years now and just wanted to thank you for making podcasts as I look forward to them every week. Being the student body president of a college in Canada, I have to deal with a lot of conflicting opinions, as well as some harsh criticism. As a former scout, I was wondering if you had any comments on how to deal with controversy or negative criticism. Well, I think there are 2 types. I just deal with people talking shit on the internet. So it's very, very easy for me not to pay attention. I just don't really look at comments, good and the bad. They don't mean that much to me. Not that I don't appreciate people that reach out and say positive things. It's different if someone slides in your DM, but I can just tone it out really easily. Now, when you're in an office setting, as a scout, as an employee, as a corporate guy, as a student body president, and you're getting them face to face, yeah, it's a little more difficult. And it takes a lot of emotional maturity to just kind of take a deep breath. Something when I was young, I mean, it was hard. It's easy to go into a shell or feel shitty about yourself. You got to, I don't know, the more you get, the better you feel out how to deal with it. So I think there are 2 types of criticism in this modern day world. There's ones where you're in a work situation or a leadership situation and you get in these, controversies or whatever. And then to deal with those, the more and more experience you have dealing with them, you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. You also got to know the people you're dealing with, right? So the people you deal with, it's kind of like a coach. You know, certain people's, makeup is different than others, right? Some people you can scream at, it's no big deal. Other people, they'll go into a shell or it'll be a disaster. I think with internet criticism, there's never been an easier criticism to deal with. Just don't pay attention. But, unless it's hard because I don't have specific examples for you in terms of what you're dealing with, but it's much harder to deal with because that is the only ones that matter. The real people interactions with criticism. Like, is it fair? If it's fair, then look in the mirror, figure it out. If it's not, then hell, just move on with your day. The 82-game preseason is in the books, and it's finally time for the real season. Don't miss out on any of the NBA playoff action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From the play-in tournament through the finals, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code JOHN. New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's code JOHN, John, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Longtime listener. Dig your content. Like this guy. I'm from NorCal, myself in Lincoln, California. Know right where that is. I'm also a long-suffering Raiders fan. I know you like to clown on the organization since your breakup. I wouldn't call it a breakup, but I would call it more like Middlekauff. You are not allowed around the Raiders, but I hear you. It's some of it's tongue in cheek. And quite frankly, you're not wrong. And there has been a plethora of bad decisions. I have some optimism with Pierce, though. I feel like he could be like a Dan Campbell in Detroit, and Tom Telesco is an experienced general manager. What are your thoughts? Well, I would agree. Like Dan, I always respect when high-end people believe in you. And Dan Campbell's biggest believers were Bill Parcells as a player and then as a coach, and Sean Payton. So it's like a lot of people talk shit about Dan Campbell when he got the job. This is not a VC firm. We're not running a tech company. This, at the end of the day, is football. You're running fucking off-tackle runs. You are motivating people in the classroom, on the field, and in the weight room. This isn't your normal job. So it was easy to make fun of him with the bite your ankles and all that stuff. It's like, I think this guy's a little smarter than you get credit for. And then obviously he hired a really good staff. And you get credit when your offensive coordinator is a star. Because 5 years ago, anyone could have hired Ben Johnson. He did. Now, it wasn't his original offensive coordinator. Anthony Lynn was. And what did he do? He fired him. And with Antonio Pierce, Coughlin's his biggest supporter. Coughlin beat Belichick twice. Coughlin's a really high-end, just high-level guy when it comes to football. And Antonio Pierce was like the team captain, leader of the Super Bowl team. Dan Campbell had been coaching for a while in the NFL. He had been a long-time assistant when he finished playing. And he even got a little bit of time. Now, obviously, Antonio Pierce did too, as an interim coach. And then he had to go kind of, I would say, mentor under Sean Payton for years. And he even said when he got the job that it changed his mindset. Because like, at my core, I'm like Parcells, old school, very conservative. And I saw Sean Payton and I realized in modern day football, you can't be like that. So the knock to me on Antonio Pierce, leadership, dealing with players, he's going to be it comes natural to him. In terms of the coaching, think of the coaches he mentored under. I like the guy. Whenever I've met him, he's cool to me. But Herm Edwards is not a good coach. It was a joke what he did at Arizona State. A joke. I mean, that's called stealing money. He gets fired from Arizona State. He goes back to ESPN. It's like, well, you've been in college football now for 5 years in a Power 5 conference. Never talks about college football. I know people that say he doesn't even know the names of his players when he's at Arizona State. And then, I mean, this is no fault of his own. I don't blame Antonio Pierce to go work for him. And then he goes to work for Josh McDaniels, who's also one of the worst head coaches we've ever seen, objectively. So Antonio Pierce as a player, can't question his credentials. As a coach, as an assistant coach, look who he's worked for. Now, he brings in Coughlin, he brings in Marvin Lewis. That should help, but I would say that Dan Campbell was much more ready for an opportunity, given he had just worked at a longer period of time for higher end guys. I like Telesco as well. I understand why they did it. I think the most fascinating thing about the Raiders is like, is Michael Penix going to be on their team in a week and a half? Because a lot of people think that's going to happen. If that happens, not saying I'll be a Raider fan, but I won't be anti-Raiders. I like Michael Penix. Hey, John, 2 years on from the Russell Wilson trade, much has been made of Denver as the quote-unquote loser in the trade difficulties it has placed the Broncos in. What about the winner? After offloading an aging asset, a heavy contract, gaining multiple first-round picks, and a capable player, is the sum of all that a 9-8 team, an unproven defensive head coach, and Geno Smith? Are the Seahawks destined to tread water for the foreseeable future? Well, as long as Geno Smith is their quarterback, they are. Geno's an incredible story. Really is. Haters wrote him off. He didn't write back. Easy guy to root for. Seems like a really, really good guy. And I appreciate anybody who isn't handed anything and figures out a way. And he did. He just kept grinding, got his opportunity, and has been more than serviceable. but there is a legitimate ceiling on how good that guy is. And you don't have a snowball's chance in hell to do anything with him as your quarterback meaningful in football. Like, you're not winning playoff games with that guy. It's not happening. He didn't make the playoffs this year. Now, he got banged up, but we saw last year, like, the ceiling, it is what it is. If that helps you get to your next guy, I would say I would give you credit on the win. But if they just go through the situation for a couple of years, then yeah, nothing really changes. But you are a winner when everybody, including myself, I'm guilty, said you're going to look really bad. Trading Russell Wilson, all these picks. Felt like they hit on 80% of the picks. They get rid of, let's face it, one of the biggest headaches in the league. That's what Russell Wilson is, a headache. His stardom and the way we talk about him far exceeds the return on investment on the field. It's not even close. So removing that and getting that back is an immediate win. So yeah, I would say regardless, obviously to like compete in the playoff, how are they going to compete though? I mean, their roster is actually not bad, but they're not. Mike Macdonald, fantastic defensive coordinator. Being a head coach is a different animal, and he's facing two guys that have now been head coaches for like 7-8 years that we all consider top 5 guys in McVay and Shanahan, who have good teams. So it's going to be difficult. Huge fan of 3 and Out, the content you produce, the volume. In a recent memory, before every NFL season, Coward predicts his pop team, a previously bad team that surprised the league and fans for the upcoming season. In your opinion, who is this year's pop team? Let's talk about that after the draft. It's not on like the forefront of my mind. I have to look back at like the standings, the rosters. I'm kind of more in master's mode. Give me a couple weeks. We'll after the draft, we'll hit on a team that had a good offseason, had a good draft, and could make the playoffs. I think the easy one is the Bears. You could argue, does that even count? As of we're sitting here right now, it'd be the Bears. Like, could they win 10 games next year? How could you argue they couldn't? I mean, they won 7 games last year with a quarterback that couldn't throw from the pocket. Now they add Keenan Allen. They have the 9th overall pick, as well as, in theory, they should be upgrading at quarterback. So they're definitely the easy answer. But the pushback there is the division. The Lions are excellent. Way better roster. Offensive coordinator back. Everyone back. The Packers, if they just keep playing like they were playing, are going to be a problem. And Minnesota has a lot of good players. Love the pod. This is from James. I've been watching for a while. I was a basketball player through college for the Cougs at Washington State. Good athlete. But obviously really interested in football as well. RIP the Pac-12.
RIP.
My question is, I'm a Jets fan who lives in Minnesota. I'm excited to see Darnold play. I'm a Jets fan. Okay. I was like, I'm trying to follow this. But for the Jets, why is there so much negativity from the media? I get the A-Rod drama, but I would argue we have a top 10 roster in the NFL. I would still take Rodgers over a lot of quarterbacks at the moment. I understand the dysfunction of the organization, but when it comes to football, how can people expect this team to be bad given Rodgers stays healthy? Am I too high on Saleh? He coaches a consistent top 5 defense. Too high on Rodgers, especially with the Bills situation. I really think the Jets should be the favorites for the division. I think your offensive line is a major question mark. I mean, your best offensive linemen all have injury histories. And if they go down, it just derails your squad. They're older players. I think that's a legit concern. As we're sitting here right now, I would say playmaking is a concern as well. Garrett Wilson's a really good player. Mike Williams gets injured a lot. Everyone roots for Mike Williams. He's a fun player to have on your fantasy team. He's a fun player to watch. He just tore his ACL. And he's been injured a lot before that. So I can't give you a top 10 roster. You do have some excellent defensive players. Quentin Williams is one of the best defensive linemen in the league. Star. Sauce Gardner's a really good player. You have some really good pass rushers. Your defense is solid. Saleh doesn't call the defense, though. Jeff Ulbrich does. He's not even your defensive coordinator. He's your head coach. Now, you get credit because clearly he leans on defense. Here's the other thing. Nathaniel Hackett might stink. Most people in the NFL thinks he blows. So if he's a bottom 10 offensive coordinator, you have a 40-year-old Rodgers and a questionable offensive line. I bought the hype last year. Picked you to win the East. Thought you could compete for the Super Bowl. Obviously, the Rodgers injury derailed that take. But as I watched your season play out, like, I think it would have been very, very difficult for you to get to 10 wins. I really do. Rodgers wasn't that good the year before, and the Packers are better than you, and they didn't make the playoffs. Packers are way better than you. So I think it can be difficult, man. I would be cautiously optimistic. My expectations would not be to win the division. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be like, can we be in the wild card mix come December? That would be a huge upgrade from the last couple of years, obviously. I just finishing listening to your weekend reaction with Coward. This is from last week. At the very end, you mentioned how you were watching the Colts-Rams game and were impressed by Anthony Richardson and forgot how good he looked. As a diehard Colts fan, I've rewatched that game 1,000 times, and I can't help but think that we got something special in Indy with Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen. Do you think the national media is possibly forgetting about how good AR looked? And what are your thoughts on the Colts this upcoming season? When I say watch that game, I was at the gym, and they got the NFL Network on one of the high TVs, and NFL Network, they basically scrapped all their shows and just have rerun games. And every time I looked up, he looked sweet. There was no disputing his physical gifts. He was the highest ceiling of all the quarterbacks last year. Hell, he'd be the highest ceiling of all the quarterbacks this year. His physical gifts are elite. He has not played much football. And the injuries last year were really concerning. So I think you could argue he's one of the biggest wild cards in the league. Now, like you said, your coach is a stud. Your coach is, to me, and McVay, Shanahan, LaFleur. Like I would, if he was a stock, I would pump a lot of cash into it. But some things are out of your control. And when your quarterback has injury concerns, no matter how great of a scheme guy you are, and let's face it, he's not the most accurate guy. So injury concerns, accurate, like there's a lot to deal with there. But like if I were you, I would be much more excited than Jets fans. Because if it does work, like you could win 12 games. Your ceiling is pretty high. But it's just a wait and see. And let's face it, every time, at least for a year, he gets hit, he's down on the field for an extra second or two, your heart's going to drop. You're going to swallow really hard. You're going to hold your breath. Because that's how it is with guys until they that have some durability questions prove that they can be durable. See that like with Joel Embiid. Every time Anthony Davis, every time they go down, it's like, oh, here we go again. Until Anthony Davis or Anthony Richardson kind of shake that, it just kind of is what it is. But you almost made the playoffs last year with Gardner Minshew. So if this guy is on the field, in theory, you should be better. But he's got to stay on the field. 17 games is a long time, man. Especially as an athletic, running, mobile, I don't want to say run guys over, but he's big enough to. So it's going to be a fascinating case study. It really, I'm excited to watch. I am. And like I said, I would be excited if I was you.